Thanks, Mike and Mike. Great pleasure to be here again at SearchFest. Always my favorite search conference, and great being in Portland. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm going to speak really quickly. But fear not, by the end of the day, a transcript of what I'm speaking on will be published online on my blog, SEMpdx.com, and beautiful, full HD slides for you, which I know you're really looking forward to. So let's dive right in. This is the... Excellent. Okay, until very recently, search engine optimization was, unsurprisingly, predicating on leveraging the world of web documents. We've always called what people do when they plug some words into Google a search. And it's been appropriate because there's always been a ready answer to the obvious question, search for what? And that's web pages and other web documents. And so we call the thing returned by Google in response to a search engine, in response to a query, a search engine results page, a list of linked web documents where, if the searcher was lucky, they might find the information for which they were looking. 10 blue links. The optimization strategy for the search environment was self-evident. Ensure your web documents appear highly in those search results so that your documents are the ones suggested to searchers. Over the course of time, that environment changed. Verticals started to appear in the search results like blocks of news or video results, and some individual search results started to appear with other information attached to them, rich snippets. But at the end of the day, the bread and butter of the search results and the focus of SEO remained references to web documents. But recently, this has changed. What we get in return for something typed into Google contains not only references to documents, but to data as well. That is, the search results now contain a mix of traditional document references as well as direct answers, with a proportion of the latter gradually but relentlessly growing. The diminished presence of those document references changes SEO, but it is unlikely that these document references, links, will ever wholly disappear from the SERPs. However, as what I want to explore today is optimizing specifically for the data part of what's returned in response to a query, or as we'll see, some other trigger, I want you to join me in a thought experiment that I'm going to use to frame my talk. That is, what if a search engine returns 0 blue links? How would one optimize for search in a world where there were no document references, no links to your web pages, but only data? Rather than dwell on this premise, I want to get to the meat of the matter it's intended to highlight, being successful in search in ways apart from driving search to website traffic. But I will note that I recently wrote a piece that explored this premise in detail, which I invite you to read at your leisure as an ever so exciting prequel to this presentation. In this piece, I even went so far as to say, for much of the information we care about, websites, in fact, might just turn out to be an artifact of the early days of the web, a necessary bridge as we figured out how to better create, store, and share information over the internet. That's nuts, right? Who would be so crazy as to suggest such a thing? Well, in the course of putting this deck together, I stumbled across and reacquainted myself with a post written more than a year ago that contained a pretty similar sentiment. I believe, wrote Mike Arnesen, that the document-based web was simply a limitation of our thinking at the time. It was hard to imagine a web of data at first, much less architect a way to allow data to be interchangeable and meaningful over such an astronomical scale. I commend this excellent piece to you as well, not only because it is shorter and less meandering than my own, but because Mike does a great job in articulating the difference between documents and data, something to which I'll be returning to time and time again today. But I pledge as much as I possibly can, keep this about SEO. That is, optimizing your digital presence for the best performance and best visibility in search engines. The response, frankly, from many search marketers to the evolution of search engines, and in particular to the appearance of direct answers and data verticals in the search results, has been to abandon search marketing. Rely less on search engines for traffic, build direct relationships with your customers, shift your focus to social. These may be sage pieces of marketing advice, but they have nothing to do with search marketing. So I pledge that as I explore with you data-driven approaches to search engine optimization, that I will endeavor to keep the focus of how you appear in search engines. Because the fact that the SERP to website traffic basis of SEO is waning doesn't mean that the search engines cease to be a part of the internet ecosystem. There are 1 trillion searches conducted each year on Google. That's more than 38,000 queries a second. And your company or product or organization is going to be a part of the information exchange that occurs on Google. Just because your website may no longer be at the heart of your presence in search results doesn't mean you can ignore search, because you will have a presence in search whether you want to or not. Which leads me to my first piece of optimization advice. If data about you is going to appear in the search results, and it is, make sure it's accurate by providing it yourself. Declare data even if it doesn't provide you with a rich or structured snippet, although rich snippets are in themselves highly desirable because even in the absence of referral traffic, they compactly convey information themselves. Doing so will ensure that information that's displayed about your phone number, your address, your product's prices, your product's availability, your company's social media profiles, and your official website is correct. And those are just some of the types of information that Google officially supports publishers providing about themselves and their wares. A common complaint is that by providing your data to the search engines, you're giving away your data, and that doing so hurts you, because providing the means by which the search engine can answer a query without referring a visit to your website. Correct. And hoarding your data helps you how? I don't know. But I do know that withholding your data hurts you. It hurts you because Google is going to return information about you when they're asked to, and it's going to have to get that information from somewhere else. But most of all, it hurts you because you've excluded the possibility of having your data linked to other data, which is how data becomes useful in itself. Data in isolation is not useful. Data that is linked to other data and you can make comparisons with other data is. And unless the data you're withholding is especially precious and unique, keeping it captive in a web document doesn't mean you're going to force the search engine to refer traffic to you. The most straightforward way of providing the search engines with your data is to annotate web documents, web pages, with information about the data found in your documents, transforming strings, text, into usable information. Acme Supreme widget is less than 5.00. If you provide that only as text, a data consumer won't know what you're talking about. A search engine will be able to index the keywords and so might be able to turn a reference, a URL, to the document that contains that string for a query like Supreme widget 5, but that's about as far as it can go. A search engine won't surface the Acme Supreme widget in the search results for the query, and it's a query we're going to start seeing. Sorry, missed it. A search engine won't surface the Acme Supreme widget in the search results for the query pounds because there's no way for the search engine to know what the 5 refers to. 5 pounds, 5 kilograms, $5. If the string read Acme Supreme widget is less than 5 pounds, there's still ambiguity because a pound can be a unit of currency or of weight. And even if you say less than 5 pounds sterling, you're still forcing Google to extract a piece of data from a bunch of text and still forcing it ultimately to guess. Providing Google with structured data removes that ambiguity and improves the chance that the Acme widget Supreme will make some sort of appearance in Google's universe. Why? Bear with me as I introduce a principle that may seem esoteric, but I think is really important to understand if you want to be successful in search engine optimization. Use URIs as names for things. That's the first principle articulated by Tim Berners-Lee in his touchstone piece, Linked Data Design Issues. He goes on to say, use HTTP URIs so that people can look up those names. When someone looks up a URI, provide useful information using the standards, things like RDF and Sparkle, and include links to other URIs so that they can discover more things. So when you're using something like schema.org or the Open Graph Protocol, it's the provision of information and other links at the lookup location, at that URI, that makes structured data so powerful and so much more sophisticated than what might be called first-generation metadata. While structured data may appear not to be far removed from the expression of any other arbitrary name-value pair, the standards employed mean that structured data declarations are not arbitrary, but positively dripping with meaning. For example, when you surround the title of an article with this bit of code that says, this here thing is a schema.org article and its title is Semantic SEO Tips, well, I won't read all of that, but it knows precise things about what you're talking about. It knows what an article is and what other types that it's related to. It knows what sort of values that it can be expected. It knows what the range of that data is. That's why Google recommends, for example, using same as for many schema.org types. By providing Google with a Freebase or Wikidata or Wikipedia link, you're using URIs to identify things, and that helps Google connect searchers that are looking for those things with your data. I'll talk more about Google Now later, but you can see how unambiguously identifying your entities with same as can help connect Google users with your data, even if they're not searching for things. Use global identifiers for your products as well. Remember that when you're using something like a GTIN, the product identifier associated with a UPC barcode, you're not merely identifying the thing you're talking about, but because a data consumer, again, can find information about that thing at the identifier, and because properties are shared by other things, your thing is immediately plunged into participation into the world of linked data, as you can see from this GTIN chart. And I bring up GTIN specifically here to highlight the fact that there are other vocabularies besides schema.org, and GS1, the organization that issues GTINs and barcodes, has just issued a draft GS1 vocabulary for products, which allows many more attributes of products to be described than schema.org does. And if you're interested in this, let me know. I know a guy at GS1 that really wants to talk to you. But because it's a formal vocabulary that uses URIs as names for things and employs standards like RDF, it plays nice with schema.org, as does, for example, BibFrame, vocabulary for libraries. Another advantage of using standards to provide data to the search engines is that it can be made available to other data consumers as well, either directly in the same form or with readily made syntactic modifications. Once you've made the decision to make data about yourself available, think of who else besides the search engines might find your data useful. You can include social networks. These can include social networks, content aggregators, business partners, and internal data consumers, as we'll see, like your site search and analytics. And if the mapping of properties and their values is well executed, the resulting consistency demonstrated will help build trust in your data, especially for the search engines, increasing the likelihood that they'll surface your data and associated web documents when it's appropriate for them to do so. In terms of analytics, my co-presenter has come up with a method using schema.org data to populate Google Analytics reports. It will be much imitated and modified, but in all of its manifestations, it will always be, for me, the Arnesen method. The Arnesen method is a major conceptual breakthrough because it necessarily conceives of content as a type of data rather than as a bunch of text. It provides a means of identifying entities and their properties within Google Analytics. This in turn allows the meaning of web pages to be correlated with other metrics like exit rates or page views or conversion rates. It's light years beyond the blunt instrument of string-based content groupings in Google Analytics. And that's string-based because they have to rely on URL strings or path strings in order to group content together. Very blunt instrument. It's also a way of understanding, when you think beyond SERP to website traffic, of what data people are looking for and coming to your website for, and how well your website satisfies that data demand. And, yes, wait for this, using your intelligence to help, among other things, figure out how you can get that information to your users with the least possible friction, including the provision of direct answers to search queries. Which is a good time to talk about content with reference to another Search Fest presenter, Facebook's Jonathan Coleman. Asked what's the biggest mistake organizations make when trying to craft great experiences, Jonathan replied, it's a failure to be useful, to provide actual value and solve problems. Your content should satisfy these conditions, be useful, provide value, solve problems, regardless of the environment they're served in. Throw out content that requires a website visit and doesn't in itself satisfy any of these requirements. And yes, that may mean tossing out your content strategy. If you have content that's valuable for your users, your fans, your customers, then you'll want to do what you can to connect them with that content wherever you can. For distribution of creative works, content that in itself has independent value, creative work that forms a cohesive whole that's more than the sum of the data contained therein, like a white paper or news article or MP3. These can still be leveraged, of course, although that independent value doesn't protect that sort of content from the changes wrought by an increasingly distributed data environment. In other words, this content will be decreasingly successful if it continues to be confined to websites. Futurist Amy Webb says, there is no linear distribution model, and she's speaking here mostly of news content, because everyone has a different device, and they're all going to come to content in different ways. If the goal is to maximize attention, then it's about thinking more of a distributed model, and along with that, more of a distributed way of making a profit back. For distribution of creative works, think about how revenue streams can be attached to content. rather than requiring a website visit. If you're not in the business of actually selling content, does your current conversion strategy rely on a user making a way stop at a particular piece of content on your website? If so, then it's time to take a fresh look at that strategy and the rigidity of the funnel it implies. You must figure out how you can introduce conversions at an earlier, later, or altogether different stage in a customer's journey. In other words, if your organic search conversion strategy hinges on a user navigating from the SERPs to a specific page, that strategy is increasingly at risk. Aaron Wall pointed out recently, using the example of an AVG download link returned directly in the SERPs for the query download AVG, that, quote, where there are multiple versions of the software available, Google is arbitrarily selecting the download page, even though a software publisher might have a parallel SaaS option or other complex funnels based on a person's location or status as a student or such. He's absolutely right. But a more effective solution than complaining, and Google is going to link to your download location whether you want it to or not, is to provide the search engine with the best link you can and to make sure your funnel is honed to handle lateral downloads, though in this case it's not even a link to the executable itself but to a download page. And what I'm showing up in the upper left-hand corner there, you can actually declare in your data what the download location is for a file. When you provide free downloads, and I ask for a free download on Google, set me up with your download as expeditiously as possible. Don't make me jump through hoops to satisfy the demands of your website conversion funnel. And I think AVG is actually a pretty good example of thinking beyond the web page conversion funnel. If you run AVG free, you'll know that occasionally you're forced to perform a core update to the program with a negative option opt-in free trial for their premium product. So it doesn't rely on website visits in order to monetize itself. Because of Google Now and analogous technologies being developed by other search engines and social networks, a user's search environment also includes their inbox, so treat your email as part of SEO as well. For some time, Gmail has supported something called actions in the inbox, which, using a combination of schema.org actions and JSON-LD, allows action labels like the view. If you were to click on that email, you'd get that lovely respect my authority clip with Cartman. Keeping us grounded in the search landscape, one that pushed a reservation to Google Now. I didn't actually teach the Mayor of Vancouver about JSON-LD. I know Gmail doesn't have a commanding share of the email client market. It's around 8 to 10% probably, but I'm still shocked why actions in the inbox aren't more widely used. But not as shocked as I am about how few apps avail themselves of app indexing and, by extension, deep linking. In a nutshell, app indexing allows content within your app to be accessed directly from a search result. App indexing is available to anyone with an app. And while it's currently, and you see this on the left, a feature only available to a closed list of vendors, some apps can generate notifications in Google Now if the user has authorized them to do so, and can do so on triggers other than a search. So the long-standing app or website question becomes increasingly less pressing as app content is made available through search, and now in social media too, as Twitter app cards also support deep linking. Driving traffic to your app rather than to your website, even if a mobile-friendly website, is likely to support a higher conversion rate because your app is designed to be the best performer in a mobile environment. Why do you have an app if it's not? Highlighting the principle that in the new search environment, you need to optimize conversions where they're likely to occur rather than where you only want conversions to occur. Google Event Markup that incorporates third-party ticketing links shows the principle of optimizing for conversions where they take place. By marking up ticketing links, you can generate an expanded answer card with a direct link to your preferred ticketing site. Would you rather sell a ticket or keep Google from stealing your event traffic? The same thing goes with Bing's recently introduced Order Online button for restaurants. What's more important to you, having someone visit your restaurant, website, which is hopefully has a flash intro and PDF menus, or actually having them place an order? Both the Google third-party ticketing link for an event and the Bing Order Online link highlight changes that require us to rethink and rework SEO success metrics. What if you're wildly successful with generating the event answer card in the SERPs by any traditional SEO measure, rankings, referred traffic from search, revenue generated from search, you'd surely be fired. There's neither an easy nor a single solution to the problem of measuring search visibility that isn't tied to referral traffic. Even much disparaged rank tracking has ongoing issues in correctly detecting and reporting on a brand's presence in non-traditional search results. I have no solution, but I think it's important to point out that SEO success metrics have to evolve along with SEO strategy, or buy-in for SEO is going to drop off steeply. It's definitely an area we should all be exploring more. Many of the newest opportunities for data optimization rely either on JSON-LD, schema.org, actions, or the two together, and both are relatively recent additions to the semantic search marketer's toolbox. JSON-LD is a method of providing structured data to a data consumer without the requirement for marking up web page text that's visible to humans. Sanctioned uses by Google include event markup that's just been discussed, as well as a way of telling Google about your company's official logo, social media accounts, contact information, and on-site search engine. Schema.org has always provided a way of declaring information about entities, but only with actions can activities that involve these entities now be expressed. The vocabulary now literally has verbs. JSON-LD and Schema.org actions together are extremely powerful, and their union supports the development of flexible linked data APIs. This is the combination that fuels actions in the inbox for Gmail, app indexing for Bing, and these protocols support innovations like the one displayed in this slide, a music activity exporter designed by Alexander Passant. Is this technology rocket science? No, but it's technical enough that unless you're a technical whiz yourself, you're going to need to turn to your developers for aid and support. And in any case, it's important that you formally introduce your developers to whatever markup protocols they're going to be working with, which may include but are not limited to microdata, RDFA, JSON-LD, schema.org actions, and possibly more exotic animals like Sparkle and Turtle. The steepness of the learning curve varies, and while things that have been deliberately designed to be easy on developers of that list, microdata and JSON-LD come to mind. From a functional perspective, it's important to approach and have your developers approach each type of semantic markup not as another flavor of metadata, but as linked property value or name value pairs. Again, the principle of using URIs as names for things. Unless you've got some godlike power in your organization that I don't possess, ensuring your developers have the information they need to be effective in support of your search marketing efforts is going to mean pushing forward initiatives where that knowledge is required and the opportunity to foment professional development. It can be hard to resist the urge to expedite development by doing the groundwork and providing code for your developers and essentially using them as copy-paste monkeys. But failure to ensure your developers are actually educated in the technologies important to your SEO efforts increases the likelihood of errors, decreases the likelihood that best practices will take hold, stifles innovation since your developers won't be capable of identifying those opportunities, and ensures your time will be continued to be taxed by the requirements of providing code and performing QA. I hope you've started to get the sense through my talk that the sort of things I've been discussing are quite a lot different than the mainstays of traditional SEO, link acquisition, content strategies devised to drive traffic to websites, duplicate content handling, penalties, and their remedies. Well, they're obviously quite a lot different because all those traditional SEO approaches have to do with websites and traffic to websites, and I've been specifically exploring visibility in search other than document references, that is, other than 10 blue links. But while website traffic will always play a role in the web ecosystem, the website model is waning, and it's waning disproportionately quickly in search because the search engines have multiple reasons to answer queries directly rather than sending users to websites whenever they can. Yes, they can expose the user to more search ads by doing so, but to Google that's very much secondary to user satisfaction issues. And especially in the environment, as per the quote from Amit Singhal, that's driven the search engines to evolve direct answers, and for that, what's driven the search engines to employ semantic technologies and create things like the knowledge graph in schema.org. I speak, of course, of the mobile web. It's simply a better experience not to force a user to visit a website from a mobile device. Whether or not this is good for website owners is irrelevant because Google will always prefer users over publishers. The drive from the search result to website paradigm is a result of two technological realities that cannot and will not be reversed. First, the change by which internet-provided resources are now mostly consumed on mobile devices. And second, the advances in natural language processing, cognitive computing, and semantic web technologies, which make alternatives to web document references, 10 blue links, possible for the search engines to begin with. Thanks. I appreciate your patience as I race through that, and I really appreciate you coming to hear me and Mike think. If this sort of thing floats your boat, I invite you to swing by the semantic search marketing community, SEMsearch on Google+, which is pretty active. And if you've taken or intend to take this structured data plunge, I and my partner in crime at SEMsearch, Jarno Van Driel, actively curate a list of tools you might find helpful, and that's bit.ly structured data tools. Thanks very much.
Our next presenter, thank you, Aaron, by the way. Our next presenter is Mike Arnesen.
Yeah, Juggernaut. So yeah, I keep getting invited to these conferences, and it's like the organizers name the session to like bait me into theming my deck around a specific thing. So they named the Semantic Juggernaut, so I of course like threw in comic book references. I'm speaking at SMX West in a week, and they named it the next generation of structured data. Like, how can I not do a Star Trek deck off of that? So there are also Star Trek references in this, so I'd like to dedicate this deck in honor of Leonard Nimoy, who passed away, which totally bums me out and like throws a monkey wrench in my whole game. But anyway, let's bring the mood back. Search Fest. This is awesome. Back in 2010, I was completely clueless about SEO. And my boss at the time was like, you should learn more. Go to this event. It's like the smartest guys in SEO. It's this group called SEMpdx, and they have this annual conference. I'm going to pay for your ticket, but you have to like take notes and give me a report. So I went, and I was like, these people are amazing. This is the coolest thing ever. So my mind is kind of blown right now that I'm here. It's my first time speaking at Search Fest, so super excited. There's a lot in this deck. There's a lot of like technical stuff, a lot of code examples. So I do recommend that you go and try to download it if you can. You can download it now, or you can download it after. It's on SlideShare. So bit.ly/semantic-fest. So as Mike said, I'm Mike Arnesen. I'm the Director of Analytics and Optimization at Swellpath. Used to be the SEO guy, and now I kind of oversee all the stuff, and just means I don't do as much work anymore. So, semantic markup. Who has semantic markup on their site right now? Nice. Keep your hand up if I'm the one who told you to do it and helped you. Yes. All these. So, I apologize because I made you do it the hard way. This is a little teaser for what's to come later in the deck. I'm going to tell you how to do it without doing all the work that I made you do. Implementing stuff with microdata on the site, which can be really hard. I would say about like 80% of the clients that I recommend structured data and semantic markup to don't get it 100% right, and there's like issues because it's really hard to go into your source code and like add all the little snippets of item prop, item type, and make sure it validates correctly. It's a huge pain because no website is built the same. There's always kind of like idiosyncrasies, and it's it's a challenge. So I'm going to be showing a way to do what you used to have to do manually, dynamically, and not have to actually touch your source code. So, little preview there. So, my journey towards figuring out all this kind of stuff and the things that Aaron was mentioning before, the quote-unquote Arnesen method, stemmed from this idea of thinking about why I was implementing structured data on a website and thinking that it just ended with getting that little nice rich snippet in the organic search results. I thought, this is awesome. Like, I get a product like star rating in the search results, and that's good. I did my job. Or like I got the little event markup, and people can click into my events, and it's a little more attractive. We could say that it's going to improve click-through rates. Hard to measure that. But that's not the end of the story. And I started thinking about how can we actually figure out what the ROI is going to be on implementing structured data, because as I kind of mentioned before, it's a lot of work to get it done and to get it done right. So started thinking about what we could possibly do to figure this out, and I was like, why can't I track this? What could we possibly try? So I started thinking about options, and like this is one of the things that I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm like, I think we could do this for SEO, and I think we could do this for analytics. And then my wife wakes up and she's like, why are you on your phone taking notes at like 2 in the morning? So this was one of those ideas. I decided it wasn't that great. So one possible method for monitoring how your structured data was doing would be to, one, you could go and scrape Google's results and log anytime your site showed up with a rich snippet attached to it. You'd have to like write a program to do that, and then keep a record of that, and then get a report from like Google Analytics and look at your top organic landing pages. You could get those two things side by side, merge them in Excel, use a VLOOKUP, merge the data, and then kind of look and see like what's the traffic boost to the pages that have structured data versus the ones that don't. I don't know. That's not good enough for me for a couple of reasons. One, it can get a little messy. It's hard to make sure that it's going to be 100% accurate all the time, and it takes a ton of work. I mean, that would just be crazy. Like if you're just doing like a monthly report for like a client or for your boss, that's going to be a huge time suck. So I started thinking, there's got to be a better way than that. And I know there's this thing. So my boss, our CEO at SwellPath, Adam Ware, back when Google announced that Google Tag Manager was going to be an offering, he was like, this is a great thing for analytics. Can we use it for SEO? And at the time, I said, I don't know, like maybe. We can't push out microdata from it because Google Tag Manager is taking JavaScript and using that to push tags to your site for like analytics purposes. Google at the time didn't really crawl that stuff, so I can't like put a new page title on the page and have Google recognize it. I can't put like meta descriptions on the page and stuff like that. But now that I wanted to like be able to track structured data in analytics, I started thinking about what we could use Google Tag Manager for. So how many people, I'm going to take a lot of polls throughout this, how many people have Google Tag Manager on their site? Yes, that's awesome. So for you guys, this is going to be a little bit of kind of a re-education a little bit, but for people who are new, we're just going to go through tag management very simply, really quickly. So the way tag management works is you have this technology that you put a little piece of like JavaScript, for example, in the source code of your site, and that script then calls what we call a container, and it can deliver all these different tags for you. Things that you would normally have to hard code on your site, so like your Google Analytics code. You could push that out dynamically with Google Tag Manager. You could push out custom event tracking. You could push out AdWords conversion pixels, all from one kind of interface. You have this interface you log into. Once that container code is on your site, you don't have to actually touch your code again. You can just go log into google.com/tagmanager and say, hey, I want to add like Facebook tracking pixels to the site. I want to add remarketing tags. I want to have maybe completely different Google Analytics code on this one section of my site and configure rules that are going to say like this is only going to fire on this section and these rules will fire tags on this section. So tags is one of the main components of tag management. And then rules, as I said. You could specify rules to like fire when a certain URL matches. You can say like when an event occurs on the site, like somebody clicks something, we're going to fire a tag. You can say like when an actual HTML element has a specific class, or when these little magic things called macros trigger and have information, you can kind of say that that's your condition for firing a tag. So macros are your next thing, and just think of it like a variable. You can have it be like custom JavaScript, be really complicated, or you can have it be like a static value, like your ID for Google Analytics can be just like tracking ID, and that's your macro, and so you never have to like hand type it out again. You can just reuse these things within Google Tag Manager. So those are the basics, and a very basic example is what you see on that side there is your tag. And so your tag, just at the very basic level, is like, this is going to be our page view tracking for our site that's going to send data to Google Analytics. Your rule name is just all pages. So on every page of the site, if the regex matches any URL, it's going to fire this tag. And then the macro is just the very basic like UA tracking ID. And that's just your tracking ID. It's going to call in dynamically. So that's a very basic example, but there's more that we can do with this. So Aaron talked about this idea of the Arnesen method, which I like to call semantic analytics. And what it kind of evolved from is just thinking about how we could apply the principles of the semantic web to our analytics and data collection methodology. So I'm going to take you guys through a walkthrough of how I initially started doing this. And if you want to check out moz.com /blog/semantic analytics. That's a post I did that outlines all this stuff in great depth, so feel free to check that out if you want like a really, really deep dive on it. So let's walk through. The traditional order that I described was like tags, rules, macros. We're going to flip it around here and say let's talk about macros first and then rules and tags, because we can't use a macro in a rule if it doesn't exist. So we'll start with there. So one of the macros you can set up in Google Tag Manager is going to be called something basic like semantic markup detection. And you can set up a macro to be custom JavaScript. And this JavaScript function that you'll be able to download has a function in it that looks for microdata on your page and basically returns true if there's markup on your page. And you can kind of swap this out. Right now it's looking for any item type that equals event. So if you have event rich markup on your page, it's going to say true to Google Tag Manager. So you could then fire a tag anytime there's event markup on your page. You could change it for product markup, you could change it for recipe markup, and repurpose it however you need to. And so essentially we're going to be firing a tag into Google Analytics whenever that checks out. So this function is going to allow us to bring in information from the semantic markup on your page so you can then port it into Google Analytics. So let's say we have an event page on swellpath.com, which we do. We list out all the upcoming events that people from our team are speaking at. So now if we have this set up correctly, we're going to be able to see a report of not just traffic to the event pages, but actually the name of the speaker for that specific event and that it was a semantically marked up event. And we can look and say, out of all these events, here's the speakers that are most popular because we're pulling in the speaker name. Here's the venues that seem to get the most page views. When we speak at SearchFest, we get a ton of traffic to the site. When we speak at like an SEMpdx monthly event, maybe we don't get as much traffic. We can even pull in the name of the title or like the generalized topic. We have a nice healthy competition at SwellPath between PPC and SEO, so we could pull in like SEO event and PPC event and see who's really better. And then so the rule that's going to fire your tag is just if that semantic markup detection thing checks out. And then we also add a condition that says GTM DOM. So what that means in Google Tag Manager is just that the page fully loaded. So we want to make sure that the page fully loads so the macro can then look for semantic markup and make sure that it finds it if it is indeed there. And then what we ultimately will do is go to our existing page view tag that's firing just our regular Google Analytics code. And within that, you can just add different custom dimensions that you want to be able to send into Google Analytics. So you want to set up a new custom dimension in GA and then figure out what the index is it's going to tell you in your GA interface. And then you use that macro we created previously as the value for that. So when you get your report, it's going to say for your second custom dimension, here's what it is. And it's going to bring in like semantically marked up event with Mike Arnesen speaking, for example. And this is kind of an example report of what we get at SwellPath. It'll be easier to see when you download the deck. But it's talking about like, the speaker at the specific event, and then it says semantic event in parentheses. So you get a good report where you can see not just traffic to landing pages that like you think have semantic markup on it, or you're like, yeah, 80% of my event pages have this markup. You can actually see which ones really have semantic markup, what type it is, what the properties are. And you can kind of just mix and match and build out your own values. So whatever's important to you, you can bring that into Google Analytics. So that was my first attempt. And through the process of implementing this for a couple clients, for myself, I realized that there's probably an even better way to do this. There's a more elegant solution that we can use that's going to leverage some ideas from our advanced analytics implementations that we do at SwellPath and make this more streamlined for SEO purposes, for enabling semantic analytics, and for potentially pushing out structured data without having to apply markup to our site. So the answer is dataLayer. This was like SwellPath when we first discovered the dataLayer. Everything was like dataLayer. So in basic terms, what we're talking about here is for any given website, there's your application layer and an experience layer. You can have the application layer, you can think of that as your database, your content management system. It's what makes all the magic happen. The experience layer is what your actual output of HTML is. So that's what the user interacts with, that's what they see. The data layer goes in between and brings information from the application layer into this in-between place where analytics can access it, your experience layer can access it. You're just making things really readily available. And with Google Tag Manager, they have a functionality where you can pull information out of the data layer and use that in your tags and in your macros and things like that. So it's super cool. I love it. And we're going to talk about how we can use this. So JSON LD, JavaScript object notation for linked data, something Aaron talked about. I think it's super cool. So think of it like this. The enterprise is like JavaScript. And with a tractor beam, JavaScript can take structured data and pull it along. So you're using JavaScript to transport structured data to the public-facing kind of front end of your website so that Googlebot can access it. Here's another kind of visualization. So trying to figure out how we can have JSON LD pass into Google Tag Manager via the data layer. So you have our application layer, and then this is how it kind of currently is on most sites. So the application, the database, CMS, what have you, is going to create your metadata. That's what populates the page title, the meta description for each page. It's all stored in your application layer database. It's also, the application layer is feeding your analytics. It's also feeding your microdata if you have that set up dynamically. Otherwise, you might just be hard coding it. And then the application layer also passes everything to your experience layer. So let's add in a data layer to that. And so then we can actually change it up a bit. So the application layer, that's still going to power our metadata, but we can have the data layer also power our analytics, also power our experience layer, and also allow us to grab that and construct dynamic JSON LD structured data and push that out so that Google can access it. So microdata becomes unnecessary, and we can just wipe that off, and we don't have to have anything hard-coded in our page. So what the data layer looks like is this is typically going to go in the head of your site. It's just like a standard piece of JavaScript, except it's going to just kind of specify some information. So there's a ton of good information on this on Google's documentation websites, so check it out. But essentially what we have here is just a little piece of code that's going to say this is information about a product. Here's like the name, here's the ID of the product, the price, the brand and category and all that stuff. If you're implementing e-commerce analytics for your site using Google Tag Manager, you already have this stuff on your site. This is like a default thing that you need to have like enhanced e-commerce analytics tracking in Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. The only thing you actually need to add if you want to repurpose this for semantic markup is just the rating. That's the only thing you don't already need for analytics. So you add that in, then you have everything you need for both analytics and for semantic markup for products. Super cool. For a lot of our clients, it's going to be a really easy addition. And then you can go into Google Tag Manager and set up these macros. And a default type of macro is called a data layer variable. And so Google Tag Manager already knows how to go look for data layer stuff. So if you have that implemented on your site, what we just pulled up, Google Tag Manager knows to go look for that. And you can just say, like, here's the name of the data layer property we want you to pull out, and we want to be able to use this in our GTM implementation. And from there, we're going to build out what I talked about earlier with kind of like the on-page markup detection functions, is we're going to have a piece of JavaScript that's saying, take all these data layer variables from the site, from the data layer, and build them into something that we can pass into Google Analytics. And here's a kind of easier to read code on that. So we're just saying, like, the function is if there's a property name in the data layer and its length is more than 0, we're going to return that as an element that we can pass into Google Analytics. So we could have this on all pages, and whenever something is semantically marked up on the page, that information will appear in our analytics reports. Otherwise, it's going to return no semantic markup. So if you look at any report, you just apply the secondary dimension that's called semantic custom dimension, and you can either see it has semantic markup or it doesn't, and actually which type of semantic markup that it is. And then again, you just add that custom dimension to your page view tag. So you put your macro in there, and then it's going to feed that information automatically to Google Analytics. But here's where it gets really cool. I can't have a Star Trek referencing presentation without Wesley Crusher and his awesome rainbow sweater. So we're going to take data layer variables, use data layer macros in Google Tag Manager, use those macros in a custom tag within Google Tag Manager, and then push that out to our site so Googlebot can index it. This is what it's going to look like. So this is a tag we can just paste into Google Tag Manager. And when you see like the double kind of curly braces there, if you go to like name or description or offers, that's information that's just pulling out of the data layer with Google Tag Manager. So you can say on every product page on my site, use this script, and it's automatically going to pull the appropriate variables from every single product. So if you have 2,000 products on your site, you need to create one tag, and it's going to send it out for all your products to have semantic markup. You never need to touch your code after you've implemented the data layer. And so you set up a rule that says like fire on all product pages. If it was recipes, you could have a rule for that. You just need to figure out what your site architecture is. And then you can always just validate it too after you have implemented. Just make sure it checks out. So Google has a new structured data validation tool, which is super cool. It picks up JSON LD. And what you end up getting is a rich snippet in search. You can Google this right now. If you Google Search Fest, it's bringing in the event location and a bunch of other information without having any microdata on the page. Nothing's there. If you look in the source code, we don't have it. One of the things we're also seeing that's super cool is because we have the URL of the hotel hooked up, like Aaron was talking about with the same as stuff, Google is occasionally returning the Sentinel Hotel as a knowledge graph entity when you search for SearchFest because it knows that's the location. It knows that it is the same entity as this hotel. So it's super cool, and that's what Google wants to move forward to doing. So really, this blows my mind and is super amazing. Let's just watch this because it's super cool. Can you guys even see that? He's like super stoked about this.
His head's going to explode.
I think Aaron and I both had brain explosion references. So anyway, so at the end of the day, we don't just want to implement structured data on our site. We know why we need to. We know that it is going to be helpful, but we need to be able to measure it. That's what we need to do. As marketers, we need to be accountable for the performance of what we're recommending for our clients, for our own sites. We would need to be able to talk to our bosses about this kind of stuff. So we need to be able to track the performance of something that admittedly requires a little bit of a leap of faith to implement. It's like, do all this work to implement structured data on your site, we think it's going to pay off. Actually track it. You can, and it'll also allow you to have much greater insight into just your overall content performance in general. So enhance your analytics with that. And it can be super helpful, as kind of Aaron mentioned a little bit, is it can really inform your marketing strategy, because if you have products and things like that, or recipes or events, you can pass in all this granular information about each of those products and view it in aggregate and see like which recipes with a primary ingredient of X are the most popular. Like, are my tofu recipes the most popular, or are the chicken recipes most popular? At SearchFest, it's probably bacon recipes are the most popular. But you can find that kind of stuff if you set this up. So it's really cool. And then you can also, now you can officially roll out the stuff with JSON LD, and you don't have to edit your code. It's so amazing. So I'm not sharing this on Twitter, but feel free to share it yourself. If you go to bit.ly/semanticgtm, you can actually download a container for Google Tag Manager that then you can import into your own implementation, and it's going to add all the tags I just talked about so you can implement this on your site. You're going to need to make a few changes. It has a README file attached to it. It's in the tags. So if you upload that, you merge it with your existing Google Tag Manager container, and it'll tell you everything you need to do to get this rolling, and you'll be good to go. So you can also get my deck. It's bit.ly/semantic-fest. That's on SlideShare. So thank you.
Semantic GTM. All right, thank you, Mike. We have Scott Fish is volunteering and walking around with a microphone to start us off with questions. We've got some time, so put a hand up if you have something to ask Mike or Aaron.
With JSON LD, how important or how concerned do you think we should be about making sure that the information in there is also visible to the user versus adding information that's not visible?
Aaron may have something to add to this, but what I've seen is that Google does appear to be kind of trying to validate with kind of what they see in JSON LD versus what's actually publicly accessible on the page. Like for SearchFest, with JSON LD, we've defined like the average price and the availability and stuff like that. But that's not actually on our central SearchFest page. It's on like we have a separate tickets page and a separate agenda page. So it's actually not showing any of that information. It's only showing what's concretely on the main SearchFest page. So that's my suspicion.
Yeah,
See the
there's
same?
and it depends on the type too. Certain data types, it's more forgiving of whether or not that data is represented in the code. But in their new structured data guidelines that they released in the last few weeks, they no longer have the express requirement to have human readable text in the page, but it says that you're supposed to, and this is a paraphrase, but it's supposed to be reflective. Your code is supposed to be reflective of the content of your page. And there's still not, to be clear, not all rich snippet types are yet supported by JSON LD. Some of them still require microdata or RDFA. But they did also say in that new documentation that they're moving towards supporting as many types as possible of JSON LD. And finally, I think it's because, as Mike kind of intoned, they've gotten better at kind of matching up the on-page information with what's in the JSON LD script.
Aaron, you mentioned educating developers and helping developers understand how to implement structured data and JSON LD. Do you have any tips, or either of you have any tips for somebody at an agency working with in-house developers at their client to do that education? Because that seems to be definitely one of the toughest things.
Yeah, actually, Mike's more a developer than I, so maybe I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, so your question was asking about how agency marketers can work best with in-house developers. Get them on Google Tag Manager. It's great. So if you get a development team to implement the basic Google Tag Manager code, it's literally like 6 lines of code, put it into the top of every page, and then do the data layer, which is a little more complicated but not super time consuming. Once you have that, you can hop into Google Tag Manager's interface and do everything else that you need to do. They don't need to know a thing about JSON LD. It's great if they do, but they never need to worry about it or even know about it.
I'll just point out too that one of the developers of the JSON LD specification, Manu Sporny, was like adamant that we're not going to use RDF in any of the, and it's snuck in. So I don't want to scare people is what they came up with for JSON LD about this being semantic technologies, except for the single line context and sometimes type. You can't tell that it's not just JSON, right? So it's made to be very developer friendly. But just adding that line of context, then that's that whole world of dereferenceable URIs and all of that great stuff that comes along with it. So finally, I would say come up with valid use cases for the use of JSON LD that's going to prove its worth, and then you'll get buy-in.
Awesome presentation. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Mike. Couple things. So I actually started researching Google Tag Manager a while back, and we never really saw a big need for it because we are developers and that, so we have access to all the sites. But you obviously bring a very valid point as to other ways to utilize it. I'm wondering if there's a break-even point in your mind as far as site size and things like that, where you'd either manually do it or you'd actually implement this. Part of it's not having done it. It might be super simple, and you could say, oh yeah, 20-page site, go ahead and implement it. But in my thoughts, it would be a larger site. I'd just like to get your feedback on that, and then also find out a little bit more about what are some of the schema markup that's not supported as a secondary.
Yeah, so for the break-even point, I mean, I think the ease of implementation is just so ridiculous that, like at Swellpath, we run it on sites with 1 million+ pages, and I run it on personal sites that are 3 pages. It's just so much easier to manage everything, and it has excellent versioning control as well, so you can like collaborate with other people. You can request permission to push new versions of the container if you have like one person who needs to own all that stuff. It just really makes it a lot easier to like avoid messy analytics implementations and even like the JSON stuff. So yeah, there's
And
that.
I'd add to that, I would say any site, like 2 pages, you're good to go, because GTM's really easy to set up, and the main thing is you never need to change hard-coded GA code ever again. As Mike said, you just go into the container and change it there. So whether you got 1 page or 10 pages or 10 million pages, you don't have to go to your developer and say, hey, we made this change to Google Analytics, and now you've got to go do a find and replace operation on 1 or 10 or a million pages. You never need to do that again. Also mention is that GTM is the free and most common version. There's other tag management solutions. At EA, for example, we use Tealing. It's all the same principle where you have rules and all that stuff. Answer to your second question is that most types basically aren't supported yet by JSON-LD. It's a gradual process, so some of the bigger types like reviews and products aren't yet supported, but keep your eyes open. And by the way, I have done a test. I did a test with my blog where I put just article markup in JSON-LD that wasn't apparent anywhere on the site. And it may not give me a rich snippet, but I checked. It's being absolutely detected in Google Webmaster Tools, even though it's not a supported type.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think we've opposite end of the room.
He was just stretching.
Oh, now you have to ask a question. All right, is there anybody else? No? All right, well, let's give another thanks to Mike and Aaron. Another thank you to Yex for sponsoring this future web track. Reminder, the slide decks will be, will be available at SEMpdx.org/2015 slides. The password is SEMpdx15.